Welcome to my channel. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and like. On Noctara, darkness is not merely the absence of light, it is a curse that weighs upon the soul. Light is identity, life, proof that a Noctari belongs to the eternal flame, the force that binds them to their ancestors, to each other, to the very planet itself. Lirien was born under the faint glow of a fading eternal flame crystal, in a frigid birthing cave where stone walls swallowed all sound. No one sang the song of welcome. No voice rose to greet her. Her body, translucent as shattered glass, could not hold the radiant light of the eternal flame. The veins on her skin glimmered dimly, like lost stars in a pitch-black storm. They called her soulless. Not a name, but a wound, a verdict that she belonged neither to Noctara nor anywhere else. Lirien trudged through the fringes, where darkness was thick, heavy, like a venomous whisper. Her tattered cloak clung tightly to her body, but the cold still tore at her flesh. A makeshift heat emitter whirred at her side, its weak orange light flickering like the breath of a dying creature. It was the only thing keeping her from being swallowed by the dark, the only thing she could call her own. Other Noctari, the radiant ones with skin aglow like rivers of magma, glided past her in the stone corridors. Their light cast songs without words upon the walls, but their eyes never met hers. They looked through her, as if she were a crack, a specter. To see a soulless was to acknowledge the failure of the eternal flame. On Noctara, failure was not permitted to exist. Her cave lay at the farthest edge, where the wind howled like the cries of the forgotten. She sat on a slab of icy stone, trembling hands adjusting the heat emitter. The faint veins on her skin glimmered, like moonlight trapped in frost, too weak to banish the dark but refusing to fade. Once she had looked at them with hope, dreaming that one day they would blaze, that she would hear the song of the harmony in her mind, that she would belong. But that hope had died, crushed by the cruel silence of the radiant. Now, she was no longer angry, only weary, a bone-deep exhaustion, as if the darkness had seeped into her marrow, making her part of it. She raised her head, her gaze drifting across the opaque stone wall. Far off, artificial lights pierced the dark. A human rover. Their light was unlike the eternal flame, either warm nor singing, but steadfast, as if darkness were not an enemy but a challenge. The Noctari called them light thieves, soulless creatures who dug for sacred crystals. The elders scorned them, branding them defilers, unworthy of standing in the eternal flame's glow. But Lirien wasn't sure. From afar, she had seen their clumsy figures in bulky suits, moving with strange persistence. Something about their work, the way they built small outposts in dead lands, made her wonder if light had to come from the eternal flame, or if it could be forged by hands that refused to yield. She bent down, fingers brushing the heat emitter. Its orange light flickered, faint but unyielding. It was her creation, cobbled together from scrap metal and sleepless nights. Each whir was a reminder, she was alive, though no one wanted her to be. But survival was not living. Survival was walking through darkness, dodging the radiant's gazes, learning not to dream. She had dreamed of the harmony, of light igniting her body, of a place where she wasn't called soulless. But that dream had shattered, like a crystal under the pressure of the dark. A sharper whine came from the emitter. Lirien frowned, deft fingers prying off a metal piece, checking the wiring. It was failing. She knew it. It couldn't last forever, not with scavenged parts from the fringes. She needed something new, from the central zones, from places she was forbidden to go. The thought quickened her pulse, not from fear, but from a spark, a defiance. She looked back at the stone wall, where the human rover's light had vanished. Darkness didn't consume everything, she thought. It only consumed what was left behind. And Lirien, though soulless, though a crack in Noctara's light, was not ready to be left behind. She stood, her tattered cloak slipping from her shoulder. The heat emitter whirred, its orange light flickering like a fragile promise. She stepped out of the cave, into the thick darkness where the wind wailed like mourning. But this time, she didn't bow her head. She didn't flee. Darkness might be a curse, but it was also where she had learned to survive. And if Noctara wouldn't give her light, she would find it herself, even if it meant venturing into the central zones, facing the Radiant, or even the Light Thieves. Lirien gripped the emitter, its orange glow casting faint light on her skin, weak but unbroken. She walked, each step a declaration. She was still here, and she would not vanish. The cold on Noctara was not just biting, it was a predator, patient and ruthless. When Lirien's heat emitter finally failed, it didn't whine. It fell silent, a death sentence. The faint orange light snuffed out, and darkness flooded the cave, frigid, heavy, as if eager to devour her. Lirien clutched her tattered cloak, but the cold gnawed at her skin, seeping through its translucent surface where dim veins glimmered like dying stars. She had no choice. To survive, she had to leave her cave, to venture into the central zones where the radiant Noctari reigned, where she didn't belong. But the parts for her emitter weren't in the fringes. They were in the human research outpost, where the Light Thieves dug and desecrated. Lirien knew the risks. The Radiant would not forgive a soulless presence, and the humans, though outsiders, might be even crueler. But death stalked her, cold and patient. She couldn't wait. The path to the central zones was a journey through darkness. Lirien walked, each step a defiance of the skin-searing cold. Her cloak slipped from her shoulder, revealing faint veins that glimmered weakly under the dim glow of tiny crystals lining the stone corridors. She pressed against the walls, avoiding the radiant Noctari gliding past, their skin casting living magma across the stone. They didn't see her, never did. But Lirien felt their gazes, invisible blades ready to cut her from this world if she misstepped. She lowered her head, long hair shielding her face, and quickened her pace, her heart pounding in her translucent chest. The human outpost sat at the edge of the central zones, a foreign metal structure clashing with the natural curves of Noctara's stone. Its artificial light blazed, harsh, not warm like the eternal flame, but resolute, as if ignorant of darkness. Lirien slipped through a gap in the metal wall, where cold air hissed from ventilation ducts. Inside the storage bay, artificial light stabbed her eyes, forcing her to blink, her skin's veins flickering with the stimulation. She hid in the shadows between crates of components, deft fingers dismantling an old device, metal scraps and wires falling into her hands like fragments of survival. Her heart raced, not just from fear of discovery, but because she was here, in the heart of the Light Thieves' territory, those the Noctari elders despised. She didn't know what they were, whether they were truly as dangerous as the whispers claimed. But she knew cold, and she knew death. She couldn't stop. Then a voice broke the silence, not sharp or angry, just present. "What are you looking for?" Lirien spun, body rigid, her veins flashing wildly. A man stood there, his coat dusted with stone, green eyes calm as a frozen lake. Caleb Harrow. She'd heard his name from other soulless, those who spied on the humans. He didn't approach, didn't raise a threatening hand, just stood, waiting. Lirien didn't answer. Silence was her refuge, the only shield she knew. But Caleb didn't leave. He knelt, a few steps away, his gaze flickering to the broken emitter in her hands. "That doesn't look good," he said, his voice soft, as if speaking to a person, not a specter. "I can help if you'll let me." Lirien stepped back, her faint veins pulsing with unease. Noctari didn't help the soulless. They scorned her, shunned her, called her a stain. Why would an outsider, a light thief, do this? She searched his eyes for mockery, pity, or any hint of deceit. There was none. Only curiosity, and something like empathy, as if he knew what it was to be deemed lacking. "I don't need fixing," she whispered, her voice hoarse, as if words had to fight to escape. "I just need to survive." Caleb nodded, as if that was the most reasonable answer he'd ever heard. From his coat, he pulled a small thermal coil, something that could save her emitter. He set it on the ground, slid it toward her, and stood. "I'll be over there," he said, pointing to the outpost where artificial light still blazed. "If you change your mind." Lirien stared at the coil, its light reflecting on her skin, faint but steadfast. She didn't touch it immediately. She waited until Caleb's figure vanished behind the crates, until his footsteps faded into the hum of machinery. Only then did she bend down, picking up the coil, her fingers trembling. That night, in her cave, she repaired the emitter. The orange light returned, flickering like a heartbeat. But it wasn't just light anymore. It carried something else, a question she didn't dare answer. Someone had given her something, not out of pity, not out of duty, but because they chose to. She didn't understand why. She sat in the dark, the orange glow casting shadows on her skin, and for the first time, she wondered if she could step out of it. She looked at the stone wall, where the human light had faded, and in that moment, the darkness felt less heavy. She didn't know that, on the other side of the outpost, Caleb stood alone, his gaze drifting over fragments of eternal flame crystals on a table. He counted each one, a habit to stay calm, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought of her, of the faint light on her skin, of how she stood there, as if ready to face the universe itself. He didn't know her name, didn't know who she was. But he knew what it was to be called inadequate, to be pushed to the edges of the world. And he knew, in Noctara's darkness, that small light was worth protecting. The next day, Lirien returned to the human outpost. Not to steal, not for the cold or her heat emitter. She returned to watch. Something about the orange glow of her repaired emitter, about the thermal coil Caleb had left behind, refused to let her stay in her cave. The darkness still loomed, still whispered its curses, but this time, she stepped through it, each footfall a small act of defiance. The outpost emerged under blinding artificial light, its cold metal blocks slicing across Noctara's stone like a scar on the planet's skin. Lirien slipped into the shadow of a wall, her faint veins glimmering weakly, like stars caught in a storm. She didn't belong here. Radiant Noctari occasionally passed by, their glowing skin casting blades of light on the metal, a reminder that she was soulless, a stain. But she stayed, her eyes searching for a figure. Caleb was there, alone, bathed in the glow of a portable floodlight. He examined samples of eternal flame crystals, each tiny shard sparkling like fragments of a shattered star. He worked slowly, carefully, as if each crystal held a secret to be heard, not taken. Lirien watched from afar, her body tense, ready to flee if he noticed her. But when his gaze drifted her way, he only nodded, a small gesture, no questions, no demands. She didn't understand why. Noctari didn't do this. They didn't see the soulless, didn't acknowledge her existence. But Caleb saw, and in his calm green eyes there was no scorn, no pity. Only presence, as if she were a person, not a specter. She stepped out of the shadows, just one step, enough for the floodlight to touch her skin. Her faint veins flickered, as if startled by her own boldness. Caleb said nothing, continuing his work, but he left a space beside him, a silent invitation. Lirien stood there, a few paces away, her heart pounding in her translucent chest. They began to talk, bit by bit, short sentences like slivers of light falling through cracks in stone. Caleb spoke of Earth, of barren fields where winds carried red dust, of cities ablaze with artificial lights where humans lived without the eternal flame. He spoke of days when he was mocked for repetitive habits, for counting each step to keep his mind steady, to keep from unraveling. "They called me broken," he said, his voice low, his eyes drifting to a crystal shard. "Like I was a machine that didn't work right." Lirien listened silent, but his words touched her, like tiny rays piercing the darkness within. She hadn't thought of humans this way, beings also pushed to the edges, deemed not enough. She spoke, her voice soft, of the eternal flame, how it sang in the minds of the radiant, a song she could only hear as a distant whisper, like waves lapping at a stone shore, never close enough to touch. She told him of the fringes, of the cold, of nights in her cave with only the orange glow of her emitter for company. Caleb didn't interrupt. He listened, as if her words were a secret worth cherishing. One day, as the outpost's artificial light dimmed, Caleb asked about the veins on her skin. Lirien recoiled, her veins flashing with unease. "They don't shine," she said, her voice low, as if confessing a sin. "Not enough to belong to the eternal flame." Caleb tilted his head, his eyes gentle, like the light of a small flame. They shine in their own way, he said. Like stars in a black night. They don't need to be like anyone else's. His words unsettled her, cutting through the darkness in her mind like a blade. No one had ever called her enough. No one had ever looked at her and seen light. Caleb didn't stop at words. He began bringing small things, like fragments of light he placed in her hands. A thermal sheet for her cave, to keep the cold from biting her at night. An air filter, to ease her breathing in the dust-choked fringes. A hand-drawn map, its ink-scratched lines pointing to nearby magma rivers where she could find warmth. Each gift was given without fanfare, with only a quiet, "I thought this might help." Lirien didn't know why he did it. She searched for deceit, for pity, but found none. Only sincerity, as if he understood that in darkness, even the smallest spark could change everything. One day, Caleb gave her a small eternal flame crystal, imperfect, discarded by his team. It glimmered faintly, like a shard of a dream. Lirien touched it, her fingers trembling. For the first time, warmth spread through her skin, not the radiant blaze of the harmony, but enough to make her heart race. She held the crystal, its light reflecting on her dim veins, like a song never sung. In that moment, darkness was no longer her enemy. She looked at Caleb, his eyes still gentle, still patient. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice so soft it nearly dissolved into the air. He only nodded, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Lirien returned to her cave, the crystal in her hand, the emitter's orange glow flickering beside her. She sat on the cold stone, staring at the crystal, at the veins on her skin. They weren't radiant, didn't sing, but they were there, glimmering, like stars in a black night. She didn't know if she was truly soulless, or just hadn't found her own light. But for the first time, she wondered if darkness was truly a curse, or merely the place where she was learning to shine. The darkness of Noctara always held secrets, but none were as sharp as the truth. One day, Caleb's research team uncovered a vast eternal flame deposit, buried directly beneath the fringes where Lirien and the other soulless scraped by in cold and contempt. The crystals glittered radiant, like stars imprisoned in stone, promising endless power and light. But to the Noctari elders, led by Elder Vorin, the deposit was more than a resource. It was a chance to cleanse the fringes, to erase those like Lirien, the soulless they deemed stains on the eternal flame's light. Lirien learned of it from another soulless, a gaunt figure who had overheard the elders' meeting. "They'll destroy everything," he whispered, his voice faltering, as if the darkness itself had stolen his breath. "We're not Noctari to them." Lirien ran to the human outpost, for the first time not hiding in the shadows. The faint veins on her skin pulsed wildly, like desperate sparks. She found Caleb in a panic, her heart hammering in her translucent chest, threatening to shatter. He stood among crates of components, artificial light glinting off his disheveled black hair. "They'll wipe us out," she said, her voice trembling, bearing her emotions to him for the first time. "They don't need a reason. We're not Noctari to them." Caleb stood still, his grip tightening on a geological hammer, knuckles white. "They're wrong," he said, his voice firm, like stone under pressure. "And I won't let it happen." His words were strong, but Lirien saw his hands tremble slightly, a sign she'd noticed before, a hint of the inner struggle he fought. But then, a secret cut through, sharp as a blade. Caleb took a deep breath, his green eyes sliding downward, avoiding hers. "Dr. Elena Voss," he said, his voice low. "The leader of the human research team. She agreed to the Elders' mining plan. In exchange for exclusive access to the Eternal Flame deposit." Lirien froze, as if Noctara's cold had pierced her heart. Voss saw the fringes as worthless, willing to sacrifice the soulless for crystals. Caleb had known. He tried to stop it, but lacked the power. "You knew this from the start?" she asked, her voice breaking, like a crystal splintering. Caleb looked down, his hands shaking, the telltale sign of his OCD returning, as if he were counting each breath to stay calm. "I didn't agree with her," he said, his voice hoarse. "But I didn't have the authority to stop it." Lirien turned away, her veins flashing fiercely, like stars about to die. She had started to trust him, had believed his light was different, that he saw her as a person, not a specter. But now, the truth stabbed her, cold and cruel. He knew, and he hadn't told her. She walked out of the outpost, darkness enveloping her, heavier than ever. Caleb's words, the small gifts he'd brought, the thermal sheet, the air filter, the hand-drawn map, now felt like lies, like artificial light that could never rival the eternal flame. She didn't cry. The soulless didn't cry. But she felt a crack in her heart, where trust had begun to take root. That night, in her cave, Lirien sat on the cold stone, clutching the eternal flame crystal Caleb had given her. Its faint light reflected on her skin, a reminder of trust's fragility. She wanted to throw it away, to let the darkness swallow it, as it had swallowed her hope. But she didn't. She gripped the crystal, her fingers trembling, feeling a tiny warmth spread through her skin. It wasn't radiant, didn't sing, but it was there, steadfast, like the orange glow of her self-made emitter. Lirien stared into the darkness, hearing the wind howl like the cries of other soulless. They would be erased, crushed under the ambitions of elders and humans. But for the first time, she didn't want to run. She stood, her tattered cloak slipping from her shoulder. The veins on her skin glimmered, faint but unbroken. If darkness wanted to consume her, she would face it. Not for Caleb, not for his promises, but for herself. For the other soulless, the forgotten shadows of the fringes. She didn't know how, didn't know where to begin. But she knew, in Noctara's darkness, even the smallest light could change everything. She clutched the crystal, its glow merging with the emitter's orange light, and in that moment, she felt she was no longer soulless. She was Lirien, and she would not let darkness win. Lirien didn't wait for miracles. Noctara's darkness had taught her that light came not from waiting, but from action. She slipped into the central zones, carrying Caleb's geological map, its scrawled ink revealing a deadly truth. Mining the eternal flame deposit would collapse the magma rivers, destroying not only the fringes but threatening the central zones, where the radiant Noctari worshipped the harmony. She moved through stone corridors, pressing into shadows, her faint veins glimmering weakly, like stars defying a storm. Each step was a risk. If caught, she wouldn't just be captured, she'd be erased, a stain unworthy of existence. But she didn't stop. Fear was still there, but it was no longer an enemy. It was the flame pushing her forward. The Council of Harmony gathered in a vast stone chamber, the light of eternal flame crystals blazing, a wordless song. The radiant Noctari stood tall, their skin glowing like magma, their eyes cold. Lirien stepped forward, head unbowed, unafraid. Her veins glimmered, weak but steady. "I am Lirien," she said, her voice clear, echoing through the space. "You call me soulless, but I am still here. We are still here. If you destroy the fringes, you won't just kill us, you'll kill the eternal flame you worship." Her words sliced through the silence, a beam of light piercing the dark. The crowd stirred, their gazes shifting to her, no longer invisible but filled with doubt, with curiosity. Elder Vorin rose, the light on his skin blazing like flowing magma, but his eyes were cold as stone. "You have no place in the harmony," he said, his voice sharp as ice. "Your presence is a stain." Lirien gave a faint smile, fearless for the first time. "Stains still live," she replied. "And I don't need your light to do it." Her words were a small flame, igniting the crowd. Taryn, a young Noctari with radiant skin, stood nearby, her eyes wavering, as if seeing light in a soulless for the first time. Lirien recognized that look, not scorn, but doubt, curiosity about what she'd believed was true. But Vorin didn't waver. He raised a hand, ordering her seized. Radiant Noctari advanced, their glowing skin casting light on her, as if to swallow her whole. Lirien was locked in a frigid cell, where darkness was thick, a living curse. Even the eternal flame crystal in her hand dimmed, its light faint, nearly extinguished. She sat on the stone floor, her tattered cloak slipping from her shoulder, her emitter whining at her side. Darkness pressed down, but she wasn't despairing. She had faced the council, spoken the truth, even if it was her last act. Meanwhile, at the outpost, Caleb stood before Dr. Elena Voss, gripping the geological map. He presented the data, his voice hard. Mining will destroy everything, not just the fringes. Voss dismissed him, her eyes sharp. We're here to extract, not to save, she said. You're weak, Harrow. You can't control your emotions. For the first time, Caleb didn't count his steps to stay calm. He turned away, silent. He knew Voss wouldn't listen, but he couldn't stand idle. Caleb slipped into the central zones, through corridors blazing with Noctari light. He reached the cell, his heart pounding, not from fear, but from resolve. He had to find Lirien, to tell her he hadn't given up. But when he arrived, the cell door was open. Lirien was gone. On the stone floor, a shard of eternal flame crystal gleamed, etched with words scorched by her emitter. I don't wait. Caleb smiled, a mix of pride and worry. Lirien didn't need saving. She never had. But he still wanted to stand with her, not as a savior, but as someone who saw her light, even when she called herself soulless. Lirien hid in the central zone's shadows, her emitter flickering like a heartbeat. She had broken the lock, escaped, but she knew the journey was only beginning. The council wouldn't forgive, Vorin wouldn't stop. But she was no longer a fugitive. She gripped the crystal, its faint light blending with her veins. Darkness might be thick, but she had kindled a flame, small but unyielding. And she wouldn't let it fade. Noctara's darkness was not just a curse, it was a refuge. Lirien hid in the subterranean caves, twisting tunnels deep beneath the fringes, where the eternal flame's light was only a faint shimmer. She reached out to other soulless, gaunt, silent figures forgotten by the world above. They gathered in the dark, the orange glow of her emitter flickering, a small flame guiding the way. Lirien didn't promise victory, didn't promise light. She spoke the truth. If they didn't resist, the fringes would collapse, and they would be erased. The soulless listened, their eyes no longer empty but glinting with a faint, steadfast spark, like the veins on her skin. In the underground cave, Lirien uncovered a secret that made her heart race. The soulless weren't entirely disconnected from the eternal flame, as the elders claimed. They felt it, not through the harmony, not through the radiant Noctari's blazing song. It came through subtle vibrations, like the planet's heartbeat, pulsing through their bodies, through the faint veins on their skin. She touched the eternal flame crystal Caleb had given her, its weak light reflecting on her hand. Another discovery stunned her. This crystal wasn't a discard. It came from the deposit beneath the fringes, and it reacted uniquely to the soulless, as if they were the key to a new, unknown form of energy. Lirien experimented, her deft fingers wiring the crystal to her emitter. The orange light flared stronger, like a living heartbeat. She smiled, feeling for the first time that she wasn't a mistake. Caleb found her in the cave, his figure emerging under the faint glow of a portable floodlight. He carried human equipment, scrap metal and recycled tools, to build defenses for the fringes. I'm here, he said, his voice low, offering no apologies, no explanations. Lirien looked at him, her veins flickering, still carrying the wound of betrayal. She hadn't forgiven him, hadn't forgotten that he knew Voss's plan and stayed silent. I thought you were different, she said, her voice cold, like stone in Noctara's chill. Caleb met her gaze, unflinching. I'm not perfect, Lirien. But I'm here, and I won't leave. His words were simple, but heavy, a promise without fanfare. Lirien saw his hands tremble slightly, the sign of his OCD, but his eyes were steady. She realized he wasn't just fighting for her, but for himself, to prove he wasn't broken, as others had called him. Terran appeared secretive, like an unexpected spark. The young Noctari with radiant skin slipped into the cave, her glow casting light on the stone walls, but her eyes weren't cold. I saw you in the cell, Terran said, her voice soft. Your light, it's not like the harmony, but it's real. Lirien was stunned. A radiant Noctari, one who belonged to the light, was telling her, a soulless, that she had light. Terran revealed she doubted the harmony, doubted the elders' traditions. She agreed to spy, feeding information about Voron's mining plans. Lirien looked at Terran, her faint veins glimmering, as if they sang for the first time. An alliance was forming, not just among the soulless, but with those who dared to see through the darkness. Lirien and Caleb worked together, not as savior and victim, but as two souls seeking light. She tuned her emitter, merging crystals to generate stronger energy. Caleb built stone walls, reinforcing them with recycled metal, preparing for resistance. But tension simmered. Lirien hadn't forgotten Caleb's silence, his earlier deception. One night, as the emitter's orange glow lit their faces, she said, "If you betray me again, I won't forgive you." Caleb nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I know," he said. "And I won't let it happen." In the cave's darkness, their alliance grew. The soulless, Terran, Caleb, all were small sparks, glimmering in the black night. Lirien held the crystal, feeling its vibrations, like Noctara's heartbeat. She didn't know if they could win, but she knew they wouldn't surrender. Darkness might be thick, but their light, however faint, would not fade. The night before the Noctari mining team marched on the fringes, Noctara's darkness felt heavier than ever. Lirien and Caleb worked tirelessly in the subterranean cave, the orange glow of her emitter flickering like the heartbeat of a planet in defiance. They finalized their plan, every detail meticulously calculated. The soulless, once silent shadows, now formed a small force, each wielding upgraded emitters wired with eternal flame crystals from the fringe deposit. Their light was stronger, no longer mere sparks of survival but weapons. Terran, the young Noctari, led a group of rebellious radiant Noctari who rejected Voron's plan, their glowing skin shimmering not for the harmony but for the truth they were beginning to believe. Caleb, armed with geological data, set up blockades, stone and metal traps to make mining perilous. But Lirien knew, no matter how perfect their plan, they faced an unforgiving enemy. When the mining team arrived, the darkness trembled. Voron led them, his skin blazing like magma, as if he were the eternal flame incarnate. Dr. Elena Voss's team, with cold metal machines, supported from behind, their artificial lights slicing through the black night. Lirien stood at the forefront, her makeshift stone armor glinting with the orange glow of her emitter. The soulless stood behind her, their faint veins pulsing, like stars converging. Terran and her young Noctari flanked them, their radiant light mingling with the soulless dim glow, forming a strange, unexpected tapestry. Lirien took a deep breath, her voice echoing through the dark. "You can destroy us, but you cannot destroy the truth. We are part of Noctara, whether you acknowledge it or not." Voron stepped forward, his light blinding, as if to consume her. "You are only darkness," he said, his voice sharp as ice, crushing hope under stone. "And darkness has no voice." Lirien didn't retreat. Her veins glimmered faint but steadfast. Before she could reply, Terran stepped out from the crowd, her skin flickering with emotion. "She is not darkness," Terran said, her voice trembling but clear. "She is the light we refuse to see." Her words were a spark, stirring the crowd. The young Noctari rallied to Lirien's side, their glowing skin wavering, as if the harmony within them was unraveling. Voss's team, behind Voron, hesitated, their eyes scanning this unexpected unity, as if seeing the fringes as more than worthless for the first time. But Voron didn't falter. He raised a hand commanding the attack. The mining team advanced, human machines roaring, radiant Noctari light casting blades across the stone. A small battle erupted, fierce and chaotic. The soulless, led by Lirien, wielded their upgraded emitters, unleashing small energy bursts, like flames flaring in the night. Stone shattered, dust choked the air, but they held their ground. Terran and her Noctari fought beside them, their radiant light blending with the soulless orange glow, a new song, not the harmony, but life. Caleb, from the rear, triggered blockades, shaking the earth, slowing the miners. But Voron pressed forward, his light a storm unstoppable. Lirien stood firm, her emitter blazing, its orange light illuminating her face. She was no radiant Noctari, no savior, but she was Lirien, and she would not let the fringes fall. An explosion from her device repelled a group of miners, but she knew they were outmatched. Vorin and Voss's numbers were overwhelming. She locked eyes with Terran, a silent vow passing between them. They would fight to the end. Caleb, from afar, shouted her name, his voice cutting through the machine's roar. He ran to her, clutching a makeshift device, his eyes resolute. Lirien gave a faint smile, not from hope, but because she was no longer fighting alone. The darkness shook, but their flame didn't fade. The soulless, young Noctari, and Caleb stood together, their light, faint or radiant, a declaration: the fringes would not yield. Lirien gripped her emitter, its orange glow merging with her veins, and stepped forward, ready to face Vorin, the darkness, and everything. Chaos engulfed the fringes, a storm of darkness. The crash of shattering stone, the roar of human machines, and the radiant light of Noctari miners blended into a deadly song. Amid the dust and explosions, Lirien uncovered a horrifying secret. Crouching, she touched a shattered eternal flame crystal, feeling its vibrations, not just energy, but Noctara's heartbeat. The deposit beneath the fringes wasn't just a source of light. It was the heart of an ancient ecosystem connecting every living thing on the planet. If mined, not only would the fringes collapse, but Noctara itself would unravel, like a body losing its heart. Another truth horrified her, Vorin knew. He hid it, not from ignorance, but from fanaticism. He believed the collapse would rebirth Noctara, a new world shaped by the Council of Harmony's will, with no place for the soulless. Lirien clutched the crystal, her faint veins pulsing, like stars defying the night. She found Caleb in the battlefield, their eyes meeting, no words needed. They had to act. They slipped into the central cave, where Vorin kept ancient records of the eternal flame, stone tablets etched with shimmering glyphs. Under the faint glow of her emitter they read, hands trembling. The soulless were not mistakes, not stains. They were part of the ecosystem, designed to balance the eternal flame's energy, to prevent the planet's self-destruction. Their faint veins were the key, a subtle pulse tied to Noctara's heart. Lirien touched the crystal in her hand, feeling its vibrations grow stronger. She wasn't soulless. She was part of the light. They had no time. Lirien placed the crystal into an ancient stone slot, as the records instructed. A signal erupted, vibrations rippling through the ecosystem, like a news song. Her veins blazed, not with magma's radiance, but with strength, like stars forming a constellation. The other soulless, standing amid the battlefield, felt it too. Their veins shimmered, faint but resolute, a declaration: they belonged to Noctara. The signal disrupted the deposit, triggering small explosions, stone crumbling, Voss's machines screeching to a halt. The human miners panicked, Voss shouting orders to retreat. But Vorin didn't yield. He advanced through the dust, his light a tempest, eyes blazing with rage. "Lirien!" Caleb shouted, but it was too late. Vorin struck, a surge of energy from his hands slamming into her. Lirien fell, blood seeping from her shoulder, her veins dimming, like a flame about to die. Caleb rushed to her, catching her, his hands shaking, not from OCD, but from fear of losing her. "You can't give up," he whispered, his voice breaking, his green eyes filled with worry. Lirien gripped his hand, her fingers weak but steadfast. Her veins flickered, like stars refusing to fade. "I never give up," she said, her voice hoarse but strong. She stood, blood staining her tattered cloak, the crystal in her hand still glimmering. She faced Vorin, fearless. He was the darkness, not her. Vorin advanced, his light blinding, as if to consume everything. "You cannot change fate," he roared. "Noctara will be reborn, and you will be forgotten." Lirien gave a faint smile, her veins flaring, blending with her emitter's orange glow. "I don't need you to remember," she said. "I just need you to see the truth." She raised the crystal, its vibrations surging, stronger, shaking the earth. The other soulless stepped forward, their light connecting, a living constellation. Terran and the young Noctari stood beside them, their radiant glow merging, no longer separating soulless from radiant. Vorin staggered back, his eyes wavering, revealing doubt for the first time. Lirien stood tall, though blood still flowed, though her body trembled. Caleb held her hand, not to save, but to stand with her. They faced Vorin, faced the darkness he carried. The truth had emerged, not through words, but through light, through Noctara's pulse. Lirien clutched the crystal, her light, however faint, an unquenchable flame. She was ready to face Vorin, one last time, not for the fringes, not for Caleb, but for herself, for the light she'd found in the darkness. The central cave blazed with light, where the eternal flame burned brightest, like Noctara's heart. But today, it was a battlefield. Lirien, blood still seeping from her shoulder wound, stood in the center, the eternal flame crystal in her hand glimmering, a star that refused to fade. Her faint veins pulsed, weak but resolute, blending with her emitter's orange glow. Vorin faced her, his skin a storm of magma, eyes burning with fury. The soulless, Terran, and the young Noctari stood behind Lirien, their light, radiant or faint, forming a living constellation. The darkness trembled, not from fear, but from a new song rising. Lirien raised the crystal, her fingers trembling but unwavering. She activated the ecosystem, sending a wave of energy through Noctara. Vibrations rippled, like the planet's heartbeat, awakening every living thing. The soulless light flared, not radiant like the harmony, but subtle, powerful, like stars converging. It linked with the eternal flame, forging a new song, not the elder's harmony, but the pulse of life. A song of existence, of unity. Lirien's veins blazed, not blinding, but enough to illuminate the cave. The other soulless shimmered, their light merging, a declaration. They were not mistakes, they were Noctara. Vorin staggered back, his light flickering, like a flame caught in a gale. "Impossible!" he roared, but his voice faltered, revealing fear for the first time. The new light overwhelmed him, dimming the magma on his skin. He collapsed, clutching his chest, his eyes glazed as he realized his error. The harmony he worshipped was not all. The pulse of life, the soulless song, Lirien's song, was Noctara's true heart. Terran stepped forward, her skin pulsing with emotion. "Noctara must change," she said, her voice echoing, addressing the young Noctari. They nodded, their light blending with the soulless, a vow for a new future. From afar, Dr. Elena Voss witnessed it all. Her machine stood silent, her team frozen, their eyes wavering at the sight. Voss, for the first time, saw her mistake. "Retreat," she ordered, her voice cold but uncertain. The humans turned, abandoning the fringes, leaving Noctara's new light behind. Lirien, exhausted, swayed. Blood soaked her tattered cloak, her veins dimming, like a flame about to die. She fell, but Caleb was there, his arms catching her, strong yet gentle. "You did it," he said, his green eyes filled with worry but brimming with pride. Lirien shook her head, her veins flickering faintly. "We did it," she whispered, her voice hoarse but resolute. Caleb knelt, bandaging her wound, his hands trembling, not from OCD, but from emotion. He looked at her, not as a soulless, not as a victim, but as a flame that had ignited Noctara. Lirien gripped his hand, her fingers weak but unyielding. They stood in the central cave, the pulse of life's light surrounding them. The soulless, Terran, the young Noctari, all were there, their light intertwined, no longer radiant or faint. Darkness lingered, but it was no longer a curse. It was where they had found light, where they had proven that even stains could shine. Lirien gazed out at the cave, where the eternal flame still burned, now singing a different song, a song of life, of change. She felt the crystal's vibrations, her veins, Noctara's heart. She was weary, but not hopeless. She had fought, not for recognition, but to exist, to prove her light, however faint, was enough. Caleb stood beside her, his eyes gentle, like a small flame's glow. "You don't have to do it all alone," he said. Lirien smiled, for the first time without pain. "I know," she replied. They held hands, her light blending with his darkness, forming a new flame, small but eternal. Noctara remained cloaked in darkness, but in the pulse of life's new light, a world was beginning. Lirien, Caleb, Terran, and the soulless stood together, not as victors, but as those who had kindled a spark, however small, in the eternal night. Weeks after the battle, the fringes were no longer a place of darkness and cold. The subterranean caves, once refuges for the soulless, now glowed with the orange light of upgraded emitters. The soulless and young Noctari worked together, rebuilding the fringes into a place not just to survive, but to live. Stone was reinforced, magma rivers channeled for warmth, and recycled human metal blended with Noctara's rock, creating a strange but harmonious tapestry. Lirien walked through the caves, her faint veins shimmering, no longer a mark of failure but a symbol of a new light. She and Caleb worked tirelessly, designing energy devices powered by eternal flame crystals, transforming the fringes into a warm haven where darkness was no longer a curse. Taryn, her radiant skin gleaming, became the voice of the young Noctari. She stood before the Council of Harmony, now a shadow of its former self after Voron's fall. Her voice rang clear, unwavering, demanding change, demanding a Noctara where no one was called soulless. The young Noctari listened, their skin pulsing, as if the pulse of life had replaced the harmony in their hearts. Lirien watched from afar, not interfering. Taryn didn't need her guidance. She was her own light, as Lirien had learned to be. One day, Lirien discovered something astonishing. While testing a device, she noticed her skin's light changing. Her veins didn't just shimmer, they emitted new vibrations, subtle but powerful, like the eternal flame's heartbeat. She felt it, not through the harmony, but through her body, her heart. She found an ancient record in the central cave, a stone tablet etched with shimmering glyphs, hidden by Voron. It revealed the truth: the soulless were not mistakes. They were pulse keepers, born to guide Noctara through times of change, to balance light and darkness, to protect the planet's heart. Lirien clutched the crystal, its light blending with her veins, a song never sung. She wasn't a stain. She was Noctara's pulse. She stood on a stone hill, gazing at a glowing magma river, like a stream of stars flowing through the dark. Caleb stood beside her, his coat dusted with stone, his green eyes gentle, like a small flame's glow. "You don't have to stay here," he said, his voice low. "You could go anywhere. Earth or beyond." Lirien smiled, her veins shimmering, a living constellation. "I belong here," she said. "And so do you." They held hands, her fingers weak but resolute, her light intertwining with his darkness, forming a new flame, small but eternal. She felt his vibrations, not from the eternal flame, but from his heart, from the sincerity he brought even when he'd once been silent. The fringes were now a beacon of hope, where soulless and young Noctari built a new Noctara, unbound by light or darkness. Lirien and Caleb worked together, not as savior and victim, but as two who had found light in each other. Taryn led the young Noctari, dismantling old traditions, paving the way for the pulse of life to spread. Lirien still felt Noctara's cold, still saw darkness encircling, but it no longer frightened her. It was where she had learned to shine, where she had proven that even the faintest light could change the world. She gazed at the magma river, its glow reflecting on her skin, on the crystal in her hand. Caleb stood beside her, silent, but his presence was enough. They needed no promises, no grand words. They had fought together, had kindled a flame in the darkness, and that was all they needed. Far off, Noctara remained shrouded in night, but in their light, Lirien's, Caleb's, Taryn's, the soulless, a new world was dawning, small, fragile, but eternal, like the flame enduring in the hearts of those who never gave up.